Your presentation and your work here is on skill building for coaches, if I understood what I read properly. So can you tell us a little bit what that's about?
Well, the session that we did yesterday was built on some research that we've just completed on looking at the distinguishable differences between advanced beginner or novice. Actually, we were looking yesterday at novice coaches compared to expert coaches, and what makes that distinguishable difference between the two in terms of the skills they use, the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings, their maturation, and then how they actually show up differently in a coaching engagement, one-on-one with an individual. Yeah.
Okay. And what are some of the key differences that you see?
Well, I think it's important to start with the similarities. One of the key similarities are two things. One is that the skills that coaches use at every level of their own maturation and skill acquisition seem to be the same. So the skills are similar. What's different is how those skills are applied and the thought process that the coach goes through. And so, for example, the more skilled coach, the expert coach, if you will, tends to use more intuition, as an example, tends to rely on what's happening in the moment of the coaching assignment and in that particular conversation at that particular moment. And they bring in often things that they've recently been exposed to as well as their experience from the past in their training. The more novice or advanced beginner coach will tend to rely more on a process. They'll rely on a very step-by-step kind of, here's what I do next. It's like reading the recipe, cooking the cake. And so that's a big difference. I think it's also important to note that one of the things that we found is that coaches who are more skilled have acquired those skills in some very specific ways. And a lot of that comes from training and education. And I separate training and education as two different things, and through reflective practice. And that key is that they not only are learning, but they're paying attention to what's happening in their own experience as a coach, and they're gaining the knowledge that comes from that experience.
Can you differentiate for me between training and education?
Sure. Training tends to be more of skill-oriented. I think of it as it's creating the technician. And education tends to rely more on the theory as well as the practice. So I'm involved, for example, as the director of a master's program in executive coaching. It's the first of its kind in North America, and we're real excited about that. And one of the distinctions that we make is that we're not, as a higher institution of higher education, we're involved in coach education. So we want our students to understand how to coach, but we also want them to understand the theory behind the skills that they're applying. We also want them to know a variety of approaches, not just one. So that again comes back to that more of the beginner versus the more skilled and expert coach.
Not just one structure, not just one menu then.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about the master's program, what the components are?
Sure, always happy to talk about that. It's, as I mentioned, it's the first in North America, and it's based in the business school at Queen's University of Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina. We built it as a low residency program, so students can be working professionals. It's really who it's designed for people who have been in the workforce for at least 7 years, and our current students have a lot more work experience than that. And what they do is come to campus for 8 days, 6 times over the course of 24 months. So it's a 36 credit graduate program. And when they come on campus, they've already done pre-work. And in that 8-day period, it's much like a fire hose. They really work hard. We put a lot of information out to them. They have a lot of experience. It's really an adult learning model from that perspective. And the students are able to get about 70% of the instructional time for 2 graduate courses in that one 8-day period. Then they go home and continue that study, continue that work individually with teams and with the faculty. And then about 5 weeks before the next residency, they get their material and prep for the next residency session. And we started it in May, and it's built on both the ICF competencies from a skill perspective, But we also built it on the Graduate School Alliance for Executive Coaching academic program standards. And so as a degree program, again, we're focused on the skill and the theory and the application of those together. So.
What are you seeing in terms of who this is attracting? What fields are they coming from, and what kind of background are they bringing?
Yes, our current students on our first cohort really come from a range of places as well as backgrounds. For example, we have a person from law enforcement, we have an architect, we have consultants, we have human resource professionals, we have people who are already doing coaching, and we have people who are learning coaching really for the first time and trying to become better managers and leaders. We're also having people in that program who are going through a transition in their own career and preparing perhaps for a second career or a third career. Yeah.
Are you finding, this is strictly for my own interest,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope it's useful, but are you finding anything about the connections that people are making between their previous careers or their previous experience and their abilities as coaches? I have the idea that some of the best coaches I've seen build on the base of their previous knowledge.
Past knowledge.
In a particular way, and I'm wondering whether that's showing up at all.
It's a great question. I don't know that I can give you any evidence about that. And I'm not sure this fits into the interview per se, but the thing I do know is that my dissertation was on how lived experience influences the work of scholar practitioners. So in a way, that's what we're talking about, and there are some very specific influences that show up in the way people perform in the work that they do. My dissertation research was on scholar practitioners, particularly in the field of organization development, and I looked at luminaries in the field and what had happened in their lives and how they processed that experience in order to produce what they produced as scholar practitioners.
And does your work include research or information about how somebody progresses from the beginner or novice to the advanced beginner and really to becoming expert?
Yeah. So the research project that we were presenting here, it was an exploratory and descriptive project. So it's a beginning, I think, of this kind of research. It's, to the best of my knowledge, no one has done anything like that related to coaching. There are some examples, for example, in critical care nursing, and a scholar by the name of Patricia Bennett has done a great deal of work in that. But for coaching, no, it's new. And I think some of the implications of that are not only how we educate coaches, but the kinds of things that we can do to bolster and facilitate and provide some good conditions for coaches to be self-learners in the process of their own growth and development.
You mean example?
Well, so for example, the learning to be a reflective practitioner is critical to how they show up. So how do we teach people to be more reflective in their practice so that they don't have to be in a classroom to do that, but they can begin to do that on their own? Another piece is how to more effectively work with a mentor in the coaching relationship to build that competence and confidence as a coach. So those are some of the things that showed up, and we've got opportunity there.
Let me circle back to reflective practice and ask you to give me a little more of a definition, a little more information on what you mean.
Sure. And there's a lot of research on this field of reflective practice and how it shows up and how it's done. I tend to lean more towards some of the work of Donald Schoen, who very early on in the field did this work. More recently, Christopher Johns in some of his work. And it's used frequently in both healthcare as well as in education. And so I think of it as, how do we pay attention to what's happening in the moment? So what's happening right here, right now, and how do I learn from that? How can I grow from that? What's the influence of that? And then how do I look back at something? So after I leave the experience, what can I gain from insight from that? And then there's a forward piece, which is I refer to as reflecting upon, and that's what happens after the event that I can carry forward, and what's the learning moving forward. So
it would strike me as something that would be quite difficult to teach.
yeah. Well, and one of the ways that we teach it is through journaling, and through observation, and through self-reflection of the coaching experience. So helping people to pay attention to what they're doing. And another example would be getting students to write cases. So what's the case that you're involved in, and then apply the theory to that. You know, I'm drawn to Kurt Lewin's work. Kurt Lewin said there's nothing more practical than a good theory. So, you know, how do we link those two together?
How do you see the program, your master's program, evolving? What do you think the next steps will be? Where do you want to go next with it?
Well, one of the things that we've done is to recruit some thought leaders in the field of coaching, both as thought leaders and practice leaders, and Carol Kaufman is one of those, and fortunate to have that resource to be a part of our co-curricular activity. I think, you know, we're at the beginning stage, so we don't have a full cycle of experience. But I think what we found is that the curriculum that we have seems to be well designed and assimilated with itself. In other words, integrated curriculum. I think what we're going to begin seeing is how can we do more with technology to help coaches, and then how do we, beyond that, continue to provide ongoing support as a community of practitioners. I think as an educational institution, one of our challenges is not just you get the degree and then you're gone, but how do you continue to be a learner? And what's the role that we play as a university and as a program to do that? I'm already getting contacts from other schools interested in what we're doing from the perspective of how they may, in fact, develop their own programs, whether that's a degree or otherwise. So I think part of what we have the challenge of doing and the opportunity to do is to really not only set a standard and set a bar that others can hopefully aspire to, but also how do we share that knowledge, and then how do we continually learn and grow and develop the program that we have. So I would suspect that we're going to have a lot more master's degrees in executive coaching and coaching in general in the next few years. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see if there's ever such a thing as a PhD in executive coaching.
Yeah, well, I've often said that coaching, my friend and colleague Irene Stein many years ago put together a little tree related to coaching and described the roots of coaching as being in fields like psychology and education and leadership and the list goes on. And those really are the roots, with the trunk being coaching and the manifestation of that being the ways that coaching shows up. I've said the real challenge is how do we make coaching a route for some new field. So what's the next stage beyond coaching? And so coaching then has to develop a body of knowledge and create more than just a set of practice, but become a discipline in order for that to happen. And at that point, I think it would be appropriate to have a PhD, but I don't think we're there yet. I honestly don't.
I hope you get there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you will.
Yeah.
So, very cool. I really appreciate your time and your attention.
Thank you.